All right, everybody, welcome back to the KSR YouTube channel and our weekly update on the KSR Cutlass. My Cutlass, my first car. If you didn't know that, that's this car right here. And I got this car when I was 15 years old. Picked it up for $200. My dad and I worked on it through high school. I drove it to school all through high school, even into college and stuff like that, until I bought a truck to be able to drive that back and forth while I played with the old Cutlass. And yeah, I still need a name for it. Some of you guys have noticed that I just call it the Cutlass. Well, that's what we're calling it right now. So I'm gonna have a name for it eventually at some point. Maybe with your help, we can get a name for it. But it's another project today that has to do with the engine, and more than likely, I've got some stuff that I'm gonna do to that too. Got to prepare it for what's coming next week, and that's when the real fun starts. But for today, we're going to go over some of the work that's been happening with this. Now, I know it doesn't look like much, but since the last episode, just on the engine, I've got probably 3 hours of work. And I didn't video it because it was boring stuff. I'm going to tell you about it right after the intro. All right, well, like I talked about before the intro, it's a little bit of a different style episode, at least to begin with. And what's been done since the last video is a whole lot of research and shopping for parts and pieces that I need to make all of the stuff work on the front of this. You guys saw me break the alternator pulley in the last episode where I welded it to work the pilot out. So I've got another alternator pulley on order, as well as a bunch of different pulleys that's going to be all of the drives for all of the accessories, except for the alternator. The alternator is going to be on a V-belt. Just how I'm going to set that up. But this is going to be oil pump and possibly also the vacuum pump. I've been doing some measuring and calculating and things, and then we've got fuel pump, and then possibly either the vacuum pump over here, which the fuel pump will be the very front belt. That's just how that's going to work off so that I can pop it off when we go on the street drives. Probably will disconnect the vacuum pump as well for the street drives. I think that's what we'll do there. Not 100% sure, or at least, I don't know, maybe let it bleed some air so it's not drawing such a super high amount of crankcase vacuum all the time. But it's a vacuum pump that draws on the crankshaft, or the crankcase, not the intake ports. So some of you made a comment why I wouldn't run like an electric vacuum pump for like power brakes and stuff like that. Well, the car's going to have manual brakes for one thing, and as far as I know, there's not an electric vacuum pump set up that will do what we need to do with the high temperatures that'll be, like the air temp that's inside of the engine is pretty warm, 200, 220, 30 degrees. So hot oil through an electric vacuum pump, it's just not something we're going to do. So all this research I'm talking about, well, what we've got to find is pulleys that have the right ratio for each accessory that we're driving. So when it comes to driving the oil pump, this oil pump needs to spin about 55 to 60% of engine speed. That's what I've been suggested to run there. The vacuum pump needs to be about 50% of engine speed. And yeah, that's what we're doing a lot of math with, which you can see I've got all kinds of notes here, different part numbers for different size pulleys. The fuel pump we're going to be running from Aeromotive, like lots and lots and lots of different calculations and measuring for like the diameters of the pulleys to even kind of start to figure out belt lengths, because one of the things I want to try and do, and it's something that I've picked up on a couple of like the dry sump engines, but how some of the newer CNC oil pans, like the dry sump deals for an LS, let's just go show you. Like, this reminded me of it when Grant's engine came in, and I'm thinking, well, why can't I do something like this on my engine? So basically what we've got going on, as you can see, the oil pump itself is mounted right to the oil pan. It's all one piece, all machined, and it uses the same HTD style belt that drives that back there. And the idea, because those kind of belts can actually be kind of loose, like if you've ever watched an engine run with those kind of belts on it, they're not, let's call it fiddle string tight, like a V-belt pulley needs to be. Because it's being driven on teeth rather than just a groove, as long as the belt doesn't jump out of the teeth, the accessory is going to spin at the correct RPM. So the idea is that if we can mount my oil pump, kind of similar to this, on a specific center line from the crankshaft, so you know, it's calculated, we got a center line in there, we got a center line here. Based on the different pulley ratios, we should be able to get this mounted to where the oil pump for my engine is gonna do something where it's gonna mount somewhere in there. So I'll either drill a hole in this and weld a bung that recesses down into the pan a little bit, because this is really outside of the full rotating assembly, or if I need to space the pump forward, well, I'll just add, you know, a threaded bung that sticks out, and then we'll weld it and make sure everything's square to the crankshaft center line and all that fun stuff. And then all we'll have to do is, you know, this thing doesn't have to be mounted with these bolts. So the idea initially, we'll have a bolt that goes through there. And then even if I do decide to add some adjustability to it, like, well, maybe it even goes out there where it's just outside of the edge of the pan, I can machine a slot in here to give me just a little bit of adjustability. But what I would rather do is have no adjustability in that and have a specific belt size that fits it just like it's supposed to. Now, what I've done is I've gone ahead and ordered a whole bunch of different pulleys for all of the different accessories. I have a specific drive pulley for the oil pump. I have a specific drive pulley for the fuel pump. I have the alternator pulley coming in. Like, all of the stuff that it's going to take to build all this stuff out. And then we're going to start cutting and splicing and fitting stuff together. Now, another thing that I've got on order are bolts for this oil pan. Well, why can't you just go grab some bolts off the shelf? Well, if you look, this is really, really close to the edge there. So if I just go grab a regular hex bolt from the parts bins over there that we've got, we wouldn't be able to get a socket on there. So what we've got to order is basically a larger version of this. So this is 1/4 inch thread by 20 thread pitch. This needs to be 5/16 by 16 or 18. I think it's 18. But you can see once we put a bolt in like that, we can actually still put a socket on it and tighten it up. I may do studs on the 4 corners for the 5/16 bolts, but you know, we'll have only 3 bolts down this side of the engine, so that's what some of these are going to be for. All of the bolts through the center of the engine are all 1/4 inch. And another thing that I paid attention to, you guys, and I haven't done yet, I don't know if you remember that brace that I showed you that's supposed to weld here and then go down to the bottom of the pan. Well, if I smash the bottom of this pan up with a wheelie, it's going to just bend all this oil pan and possibly crack it and break it and just tear up a bunch of stuff. So what I'm going to do is take a brace and go from here over to this lip right here. So that way, if I smash the bottom of the pan up, it shouldn't just break this all off, because the idea is that the bottom of the pan will likely be moving more than the sides of the pan. You know, ideally we're going to not have any kind of wheelie problems, but I shouldn't say that because that's going to just make it happen. So the idea of when we place the engine in this thing, my idea anyways, is to make sure that I have chassis structure that is going to be lower than the oil pan itself. So this will basically all be getting cut out, and this hole right here is where the control arms go to, there, and then that spot back there. But there are kits available that replace this cross member. I will probably build my own because I want to have this cross member out pretty far and then have the tabs stick down for the control arm. So we're getting rid of all this, and the idea is that maybe even I run that bar down below and it'll tie back to some kind of bar that's back there, like you can kind of just barely see some of the roll cage stuff that's there. Now all that's getting redone, but I've done a bunch of measurements as far as where this thing's going to go, what the crankshaft center line might end up. Lots and lots and lots of planning. Now, for those of you that are having work done on a car, custom work, and you get a bill from whoever you've got working on your car, and you're like, yeah, that looks so simple. Why is there 3 hours of labor for research? Or like, why do you mark your parts up? Well, if we spend this much time on a customer's project, that time, you know, we're paying people to work for us. I get a paycheck from the shop too. So if we're investing time into it, we have to recover the value in that time to keep the lights on at the shop. That's just how this custom stuff works. And a lot of the custom things really take a lot of time. I mean, like this, for example. I looked up different bolts, and then I looked up all these different pulleys, and I was on the phone with Jones Racing Products, where I'm getting all the pulleys from, and they turned me on to an idea about how to drive the vacuum pump from the oil pump. So they have a pulley that I'm actually waiting on a picture of that is a dual pulley. So one pulley would be the attachment to the crankshaft, and then let's say I want to run the, you know, if the, let's see if we can figure this out. So if the oil pump is going to end up, you know, somewhere down here, which I've got a steering rack that I've got to worry about, obviously. So maybe that can't go there. Maybe it's got to go up higher. Maybe I need to trim this oil pump bracket off to be able to put the oil pump up higher. I've measured for width over here on the car, but I have not measured for the steering rack. So what may have to happen is we actually have to set this down into the car and do a little bit of rough guesstimation. But what I may be able to do is, if oil pump is here like I just mocked up, I can put the vacuum pump right up here, and instead of occupying more of the drive mandrel with a separate belt, I can drive a belt just around here. And the vacuum pump needs to be driven at approximately 50% engine speed. So if I'm driving the oil pump at 55% engine speed, I can run just a slightly larger pulley on the vacuum pump than I do on the oil pump. So let's say I put a 20-tooth drive down here. That's going to be the drive pulley that drives the belt from here to the vacuum pump. I can put a 22 or a 21 or a 23 to get that ratio that I want of percentages to get the correct drive ratio on the accessory. Obviously doing some of the work and the math and the finding parts in stock and finding what works with what, all that stuff takes time. And it takes a lot of it. Even to the point of me measuring the depth of how deep the holes go up into the block, and then how thick the gasket is, and then how thick the pan is, so that I get the right thickness or the right length hardware for all the oil pan. This stuff eats up a lot of time. It's basically what I'm trying to say. I mean, there's no lie, 2 hours in those notes. Maybe even a little bit more. Some of that may have been because I had a phone call or had to go deal with something, but yeah, that adds up quick. So along with the order for all of those accessories I've also ordered another screen to you know, to deal with closing this completely off, but I'm going to weld this in, and then I'm also going to go ahead and weld my oil pump or my oil return bung for the turbo. And I went ahead and I peeled the stickers off, which the guys that I think it was Man Speed Shop that this oil pan originally came from, I scratched their stickers off, and then they sent me an email. It was like, oh, it's great seeing our stickers on your stuff. Well, I did that because I'm gonna re-weld some of this. There was a lot of silicone smeared on this pan, like we might have had a leak or something in here. So I'm gonna weld over all that, and then I'm actually gonna sand and kind of make that pan a little prettier looking. And I didn't want to melt the stickers off of it, and then melted stickers are they can be a mess to get off. A lot harder than just being able to peel the sticker off into one piece. So, yeah, lots and lots of back and forth and figuring out. It works out well that if I do put the oil pump right here, it's a nice easy line from there up to the oil pump. This has a pre-filter screen in it like we talked about before. So that should keep any of the big chunks out. And what may even happen, if I've got the room, let's get that back in there. So the oil return back into the engine is this hole right here. So out, oil pump, and this is, you can see the inlets, outlets on the oil pump here. So the in will go to the top with that mounted, or maybe it's even sideways a little bit, or however it ends up working out. And then the idea is that the oil feed back into the engine maybe comes off here. Maybe I mount my oil filter somewhere right in here. Depends on how we do this line. And then the oil line can easily just zoop right back into the engine. It's a lot of back and forth on this stuff. And I almost didn't put this in an episode just because it's kind of a boring episode of me just blabbing on about stuff. But sometimes that's what it takes on these projects, and I intend to bring you guys along for 50, 60, 70, 80 episodes, which if you just did the math on weeks, let's hope we're not 80. So yeah, that's what we're going to be cranking off on this thing. An episode every week. Sometimes it's this detail-oriented stuff. I intend for it to be, you know, like when I go through and plan the starting tune-up on the thing, I'll walk you guys through that, through the wiring diagrams when we plan out all of the wiring, how we kind of do our wiring process down here. And basically, if you watch all the videos, you might be able to take some of the information that we put out there, and maybe it helps on your project. And we think that's great. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Like I said, a little bit different than normal, but necessary to build this project. Now, some of the difficulty is because it's an Oldsmobile and I'm doing weird stuff with it. But like I said in another episode, I'm weird. So that's what you get when you get on this channel. And if you made it this far in the video, please subscribe. We're a little over 1,000 subscribers short of 300,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing when I think about it, that there's that many people that have shown an interest in the shop and what we're doing here and all that good stuff. So tomorrow's video should be, maybe not tomorrow, but the next video on the channel, might be Monday, might be Tuesday, is going to be a trip out to Gainesville Raceway to go hang out with our buddy Clay Milliken and his Top Fuel dragster. So, thanks again for watching. We'll see you guys next time.